I watched him raise a crystal glass, smug and confident, with no idea I was about to burn everything down. 10 months earlier, my grandfather died and left $900,000 to my older brother, Mason. Me. I didn't even get his old tackle box. But what they didn't know was that Grandpa had left behind a sealed envelope, one addressed to me, one they hid, and the contents of that envelope would ruin all of them. My name is Eli, and I grew up in Stamford, Connecticut, in a family that believed in appearances more than affection. Mason, 3 years older, was always the crown jewel. When he made varsity football, my dad, Arthur, practically built a shrine. When I won state science fair, I got a lukewarm "good job, bud." Everything about our house revolved around Mason. Every photo, every trip, every dollar. I remember my high school graduation vividly. Mason got a backyard gala with a jazz band, gourmet catering, even valet parking. When it was my turn, a cold dinner at Red Lobster and a pat on the back. But there was one person who truly saw me, my grandfather, Walt. Walt was a WWII vet, a self-made man who turned a garage into a multi-million-dollar carpentry business. He also made the best grilled cheese sandwiches I've ever had. He'd tell me stories about love, war, and betrayal, and he'd always say, "Don't let the noise drown your worth, Eli." Especially not family noise. When he got diagnosed with cancer, I was there every day. Mason visited once, took a selfie, and left. So when Walt passed, and his will left everything to Mason, I genuinely thought I was hallucinating. The house in Norwalk, $450,000. The investments and accounts, another $450,000. Not a photo, not a war medal, not even a note for me. In the lawyer's parking lot after the reading, I asked my dad why. He shrugged. "Mason has a family. You've still got time to build something. It's practical." Practical. I didn't eat for 4 days. I wandered around like a ghost. Even my therapist had no words, just silence and sympathetic nods. Meanwhile, Mason celebrated. Within a month, he bought a $2.5 million McMansion in Westport. He flooded Instagram with pictures. New Tesla, marble kitchen, Disney cruise with his wife and kids. Every post tagged our dad, every caption dripping with fake humility. So grateful to my family for believing in me. I went to one gathering at that house. One. Mason made a toast. Some of us make our families proud, others just drift. Dad laughed like it was the joke of the year. My mom, Carla, looked away and fiddled with wine glasses. Then came the post that snapped me. A picture of Mason on a boat, captioned, "Living Grandpa's Legacy." That's when I stopped grieving and started hunting. I found Grandpa Walt's lawyer, Richard Evers, retired but still sharp. I begged him to tell me the truth. That's when he said there were 2 wills. The first will, yes, gave everything to Mason. But a second will, dated just 2 weeks before Grandpa passed, split it all equally 50/50. Witnessed by his hospice nurse and CPA. In shaky ink, Walt had written, "Both boys have my heart, this is final." But the second will was never filed, because Arthur, my father, was the executor, and he buried it. I hired a probate litigator, Olivia Tran, a beast in heels and lipstick who'd cracked over 60 estate fraud cases. She dove in like a hawk. Within weeks, she had everything. The nurse's affidavit, notarized witness logs, and the bombshell text messages between my father and Mason. "Don't worry, he'll never know." And Mason's reply, "We're set for life." Perjury, fraud, criminal concealment. Olivia built the case for 3 months. We timed the reveal for Thanksgiving. I wanted everyone there. I wanted witnesses. I walked into my childhood home, filled with smells of roasted turkey and fake warmth. Mason's watch caught the light Rolex. My father clapped him on the back and said, "Proud doesn't even begin to cover it." That's when I stood. "I found something about Grandpa's estate." I texted Olivia. She entered like a storm. Leather briefcase, calm eyes. She placed the second will on the table. Mason paled. Dad's wine glass shattered in his hand. "What is this?" Mason hissed. Olivia introduced herself and read the notarized line aloud. "Both boys have my heart," my mother gasped. My aunt dropped her fork. Olivia laid out the charges: forgery, perjury, intentional concealment. She showed everyone the texts, the nurse's statement, the CPA's signature. And then the choice: return my half $450,000 plus interest, or face criminal charges. Mason stood, yelling that I was destroying the family. I stared him down. No, Mason. You did that when you stole from me. Fallout? Their house went up for sale. Quick, Tesla got repossessed. Mason's rental property deal collapsed. My father, shunned at his golf club. Church elders stopped shaking his hand. My mother moved into a condo and finally filed for divorce. As for me, I moved to Newport, paid off my debt. I work from a corner cafe now, running my own little business. I'm not rich, but I sleep, and that's more than I could say for years. I stood at Walt's grave this spring and whispered, I did what you taught me, Grandpa. But sometimes, in the quiet, I still wonder, did I win justice or just revenge? 3 weeks after Thanksgiving, I got a certified letter at my new address in Newport. It wasn't from a court, it was from my mother. Inside was a handwritten note, not typed, not emailed. Actual ink on paper like she wanted it to feel sincere. Eli, I didn't know about the second will, I swear. I'm sorry I didn't protect you, I failed you, please talk to me. Love, Mom. And tucked inside the envelope, a photo of me and Grandpa Walt at Lake Componce when I was maybe 10. I was holding up a tiny trout. He was laughing, one hand on my shoulder. My hands shook. I hadn't seen that photo in years. It wasn't in any of the boxes they gave me when I moved out. Which meant one thing, they still had things that belonged to me. That photo was just bait. I called Olivia. Do I have the legal right to reclaim personal property my grandfather intended for me? Items not monetary, photos, heirlooms, anything. She paused. If you can prove intent or prior possession, yes. But it gets murky. Why? Because I think they're holding more than just money. That same night, I got a text from an unknown number. You didn't have to go nuclear. Hope you sleep well at night. Mason, I blocked him, but the damage was done. Now it wasn't just legal. It was personal. The next day, Olivia sent me something even more shocking. She'd filed a records request, and guess what? My grandfather's military medals had been appraised after his death by Mason's wife's cousin, who worked at an antiques firm. The appraiser's report listed 5 medals and 2 vintage firearms, one of them a 1943 Colt .45 Walt carried through Europe. They were missing from the estate inventory. The Colt alone was worth $20,000. They'd hidden it, not just the will, actual assets. Olivia's voice dropped to a growl. This is not just fraud anymore. This is felony theft. We filed a motion to reopen the estate, but before the paperwork went through, something else happened. A break-in. I came home one evening to find my mailbox torn open and papers scattered down the street. The locks weren't busted, but my back window was slightly ajar. Someone had been inside. No valuables taken, just my documents. Bank letters, a printed copy of the original will. Gone. I filed a police report. The officer asked, anyone have a reason to want access to your documents? I laughed. Only my entire family. I didn't sleep that night. At 4 a.m., I checked Mason's wife's Instagram, out of habit, maybe masochism. She'd posted a story from a pawn shop in Jersey. Zoomed in on a display case of vintage firearms, the same model Colt. The caption, someone's past doesn't belong in a box. I screenshotted it and sent it to Olivia. She called in a favor with a contact at the DA's office. It turned out the pawn shop had surveillance footage. Mason, in a hoodie, selling the Colt, using his real name. Game over, almost, because then Olivia found something else. A hidden trust. One created by Walt, months before he died, never mentioned in either will. It named me as the sole beneficiary, funded by a single check for $75,000. Unclaimed, never disclosed. And guess who cashed it after Walt's death? Arthur. My father had forged my signature and cleaned it out. The DA now had enough to file actual charges. Forgery, felony theft, wire fraud, estate concealment. And suddenly, my mother's tear-stained letters made more sense. Because she knew, maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to feel guilt now that everything was unraveling. I stood on the edge of justice and vengeance. And Olivia. She looked me in the eye and said, we can go full nuclear, Eli, but once we do, there's no walking it back. 2 days before the district attorney was set to file charges, my mother showed up at my door. Not a phone call, not a text. She drove from Stamford, rang the bell, and stood there holding a manila folder like it weighed 50 pounds. Can I come in? She asked. I didn't answer. I stepped onto the porch and shut the door behind me. It was cold. November wind coming in off the water. She wrapped her cardigan tight. "I have something you need to see, but if I give it to you, you have to promise not to press criminal charges against your father." I blinked. "Are you blackmailing me?" She flinched. "No, I'm trying to protect what's left of our family." I wanted to scream. "What family?" Instead, I took the folder. Inside, a notarized letter dated 6 months before Walt's death, a bank statement from a small credit union in Bridgeport, a photo of Mason, and a woman I didn't recognize. The letter was in Grandpa Walt's handwriting. "If anything happens to me before this gets properly included in the will, tell Eli to check the account under the name Lorna Quill. He'll understand." Lorna Quill? Never heard the name in my life. But the bank account, it was real. $132,000 sitting untouched. Opened jointly by Walt and Lorna Quill 4 years ago. I called Olivia. She did some digging. Lorna Quill was a real person. Used to be a housekeeper for the family 30 years ago. And here's the kicker. She'd passed away 18 months before Walt. But before she died, she gave birth to a child. A boy. And that boy's birth certificate listed Walt as the father. My grandfather had a second family. And the woman in the photo with Mason, his half-sister, he'd known the whole time. They'd all known. Which made me realize that second will, that trust, it wasn't just about splitting between Mason and me. Walt had tried to provide for all his children, legitimate or not. But Arthur, he buried that part of the legacy too, to protect his pride, his image, his version of the family. And now Mason had roped in his half-sister for help laundering the pawned assets. Because Olivia traced the proceeds from that pawn shop directly to a shared account between Mason and the woman. It was deeper than fraud now. It was a legacy war. And I had just discovered I wasn't just fighting for my share of the estate, I was fighting to defend the memory of a man who tried to make things right from beyond the grave. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with Olivia in her office as we combed through every line of the Bridgeport account's transaction history. The last deposit had come 2 weeks before Walt's death. A wire transfer from his personal checking account for exactly $25,000. The memo line, for EQ only. EQ, Eli Quill, me. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Walt knew exactly what was happening. He anticipated the betrayal. And he tried, desperately, to create lifeboats for everyone he cared about. But my father had spent the last year poking holes in every raft. Mason had lit them on fire. And now, I held the final match. Olivia leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. "Here's the deal," she said. "We can drop the criminal charges if your father and Mason return all assets, including any proceeds from pawned or sold items, and issue a public admission of estate fraud in civil court." I raised an eyebrow. "Public," she nodded. "Filed, permanent, searchable, it follows them forever." Part of me wanted it. Part of me didn't think they'd ever agree, until I got a call from Mason. He sounded different, tired, like a man on the edge. "Eli," he said, "can we meet, alone, just you and me, please?" I told Olivia. She was against it. But I needed to see him. I needed to look my brother in the eye. We met at a roadside diner in Norwalk. Same one our parents used to take us to when we were kids. He was already there when I walked in, hair disheveled, eyes bloodshot. "I didn't want it to go this far," he started. "You wanted the whole thing," I said coldly. "And you almost got it." He sighed. "You think I don't know I'm a screw-up, Dad's golden boy, right? Truth is, he bet on the wrong son. I was never the responsible one. You were." I didn't reply. He slid a small box across the table. Inside was Grandpa's bronze star, the one I hadn't seen in years. "I didn't pawn everything," he said. "Some stuff I kept because I couldn't let it go." "And the money?" I asked. He looked down. "I can't pay it all back, not right away, but I'll sign the admission, and I'll do whatever it takes. Just don't destroy Dad." That's when I saw it, a flicker of real fear, not for himself, but for our father. And for the first time, I wondered, was Mason the pawn too? When I got back to Newport, Olivia was waiting. "There's one more thing you should know," she said. She handed me a document, a private account registered to Arthur J. Kingsley, opened just 6 days after Walt's death. Funded by $75,000 from the unclaimed trust, $20,000 from the pawned Colt, and one final deposit, $100,000 from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Olivia looked up. "Your father's been hiding money, and it's not just Grandpa's. He's been embezzling from his own company." I stared at the Cayman account details like they were written in fire. Arthur J. Kingsley. $100,000 wired one day after Walt's funeral. The memo field was blank, but Olivia was already ahead of me. I ran his business through the Federal Vendor Registry. Kingsley Construction filed for 3 government contracts last year. 2 were approved. 1 was marked under investigation. Guess who signed the financials? My blood went cold. He wasn't just a fraud. He was laundering government funds using my inheritance as a disguise. And now we had the paper trail. We have enough to bury him, Olivia said, but I hesitated, not because I wanted to protect him, but because I realized, if I pulled this final thread, everything would unravel. His company, his pension, his reputation. He'd go from smug family patriarch to disgraced criminal. He might even go to prison. And Mason, he'd collapse with him. But maybe that's what justice looks like. Still, I had one question. Why the Cayman account? What was he so desperate to hide that he risked prison? That's when Olivia found the missing piece. An old contact at the State Ethics Board forwarded a redacted report. A whistleblower complaint had been filed against Arthur months before Grandpa's death. Anonymous, alleging misuse of family estate funds, bribery, and cover-up. But the bombshell, the complaint wasn't filed by a stranger. It was filed by Grandpa Walt. He knew Arthur was funneling funds out of the family business. He knew Mason was a puppet. He'd tried to report it before he died. But the report was buried. Silence due to insufficient evidence. Arthur had beaten him to the punch, used his role as executor to control the narrative, and now I had all of it. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was conflicted, but because I was planning the final act. Thanksgiving was just the first explosion, but this next move, this would be nuclear, because I wasn't going to ruin Arthur quietly in court. I was going to expose him in front of everyone who still believed he was a hero. 3 weeks later, Arthur Kingsley was inducted into the Fairfield Business Legacy Society, an annual gala honoring pillars of the community. He wore a tailored navy suit. Mason stood beside him, still clinging to the last thread of respectability. My mother sat 2 rows back, hands folded in her lap, face pale. They didn't know I was there. I'd worked with Olivia and the gala organizers for weeks. Slipped in as a donor guest. Secured a 3-minute speech slot as a surprise tribute. The organizers thought I was going to honor my father, and I did, just not how they expected. The ballroom went quiet when I took the stage. I stood behind the microphone, staring at Arthur. He gave me a tight smile. "Tonight we're here to celebrate legacies," I began, voice steady. "But legacies aren't built on plaques or photos in the lobby. They're built on truth. And sometimes on lies." Murmurs rose from the crowd. "My father, Arthur Kingsley, is a man who taught me many things. How to keep secrets, how to fake loyalty, how to steal from your own blood and smile through it." A gasp from someone near the front. "You see, a year ago, my grandfather Walt left behind not just memories, but evidence. Evidence of a second will, a stolen inheritance, hidden trust accounts, and over $100,000 embezzled from this very community through his company, now under federal investigation." Arthur shot up from his chair. "Eli, sit down," he barked. I ignored him. "Mason, my brother, helped him, lied under oath, pawned war medals, hid assets, built a life on what was supposed to be shared." I turned to the stunned audience. "You gave this man an award tonight, but what he deserves is a cell." I dropped a printed copy of the fraud report and court filings on the podium. Federal auditors were waiting outside. Reporters, too. I stepped off the stage. Mason bolted out the side door. Arthur stood frozen, red-faced, fists clenched. The room split in 2 people who stood with me and people too shocked to move. Within hours, the story hit local news, then state outlets. By morning, it was all over New England business radio. Arthur Kingsley, under investigation for estate fraud, forgery, and government contract violations. The Fairfield Legacy Society pulled his award. He resigned from his own company within the week. Mason, his half-sister, turned on him, filed a separate civil suit claiming he'd misused shared funds. He lost everything. The Westport house, the car, even custody of his kids temporarily after his wife filed for separation. My mother, she moved back to Vermont to live with her sister. We spoke, finally. Not as mother and son, but as 2 people who survived the same man. And me, I didn't get revenge. I got freedom. I moved to Burlington, used part of the recovered trust to open a small woodworking shop in Walt's name, Walt's legacy. I framed his bronze star in the front window. Underneath, a plaque that read, "Never let anyone make you small, not even family." Holidays are quiet now. No more drama, no more pretending, just peace. And sometimes, that's the best kind of justice there is.